The first sheet was already pinned to the line when his breath moved it, and I knew I had made a mistake that could not be unmade quietly. The breath came again, slow as weather, lifting the wet linen off my hands and laying it back down, and behind me, in the long shadow of the east wall, something the size of the gatehouse turned its head. I did not run. I want that on the record before anything else. 60 years old, a basket of the ambassador's bed linens on my hip, standing in the one court in all of a courthouse that every member of staff is told on their first day to stay out of. And I did not run. Not because I was brave, because I had 40 sheets to dry before the frost came down off the high country, and the east drying yard was under 6 feet of broken roof beam, and there was no other line strung anywhere in the compound that caught the morning. Son,
Mind the sheets, I said. They're clean.
that is the first thing I ever said to him. People ask me now, all these months later, what I said, and they want it to have been something fine. It was a laundress telling a siege dragon to mind the sheets. His head came around the rest of the way. I heard it more than saw it, the drag of scale over flagstone, a sound like a ship's hull taking the slipway. Then the light from the archway caught him, and I saw his eyes, and I understood why the porters left his food at the chute and went away at a walk that was nearly a run. His eyes were white, not pale, white all through, like frost on a window that has been frosted so long the glass has forgotten it was ever clear. He was blind, and he was looking at me anyway, the way blind men do, with the whole face. "You are in the pledge court," he said. His voice came up out of the ground. I felt it in the soles of my boots before I sorted it into words. "I know where I am," I said. "The east yard roof came down under the snow 3 weeks ago. There's no line anywhere else that gets sun before noon. I'll be out of your way by 8. He did not answer. He held still the way a quarry holds still, and I went back to pinning sheets because my hands needed something to do and the sheets were there. That is the whole truth of the start of it. Fear makes some people freeze and some people flee, and it makes a certain kind of woman fold pillowcases. I should set down what everyone in a courthouse knew about him, which was almost nothing, and what the documents said, which was less. 21 years ago, the Span War ended. My husband Harlan was still alive then, laying stone in the valley towns, and we stood on the ridge above Vessing Cross and watched the last carrier wings of the Osran Ascendancy go over, going home. The Concord of Vessing was signed in the long hall not 400 paces from where I hung that first sheet, and the price of it, the proof of it, the collateral of it was him, Article 9. Every new hire at a courthouse has Article 9 read to them by Mr. Pell the steward before they are shown where the kettles are. The surety shall be kept, fed, and left unattended. That last word did all the work, unattended. Not unharmed. That was assumed. That was the whole treaty. Unattended. No contact, no interference. Nothing that either signatory could ever point to and call tampering. If the ascendancy broke the peace, his life was forfeit, and they had given him over knowing it. If we mistreated him, the Concord was void, and the carrier wings would come back and they would not be going home. So for 21 years, in a square stone court at the heart of a human diplomatic compound, there had lived a siege dragon the size of a chapel, and no one had spoken to him. They fed him through a bronze chute in the south wall. They cleaned the court's drains from outside the wall. Once a quarter, a protocol officer walked the perimeter with a ledger and confirmed that the surety was alive. And the ledger went into a box, and the box went into a room, and that was the keeping of him. He had been there longer than I had. I came to a courthouse 14 years ago, after Harlan died, because a widow with strong hands can always find linen work, and because the high country was where I had buried him. 14 years I had walked past the arch of the pledge court, with my eyes ahead, the way you walk past a door behind which something is grieving. Then the east yard roof came down, and I had 40 sheets, and the only son was his. The second morning, he was at the far wall when I came through the arch, and he did not turn his head, but I saw the membrane of his ear open toward me, a slow unfurling like a sail taking wind. He was the color of slate left out in 40 winters, gray on gray, with old burns scarring up his chest in ropes and drips, the scar tissue paler than the scale around it, almost silver. His wings were cropped. I did not know that word then. I learned it later, and I learned who had done the cropping, and that knowledge sits in me still like a swallowed stone. But even an ignorant woman could see the wings were wrong, folded too flat, ending where they should have been beginning. I hung the wash. The frost had eased, and the wind had come up, good drying wind, and I worked down the line pinning corners, and because my mother hung wash this way and her mother before her, and because hands remember what the heart forgets, I hummed. It was nothing. It was an old kitchen round called the Weaver's Walk that every woman in the valley towns has hummed over wet linen for 200 years. 4 lines, a turn, 4 lines again. I was not performing. I did not even know I was doing it until I reached for the next pillowcase and there wasn't one, and in the silence where the song stopped, I heard that he had stopped breathing. A creature that size, when it holds its breath, changes the weather of a room. The court went still the way the high country goes still before snow. I turned around, and his head was off the ground, while the great blind ruin of his face aimed at me, and the white eyes were wide. And he was listening to the place where the song had been the way a starving man looks at the place where bread was. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to disturb you." For a long time he said nothing. The wind took the sheets and cracked them like flags. Then he said, in that voice that came up through the stones, "No one has sung in this court in 21 years. "It wasn't singing," I said. "It was humming. Singing's for them that can carry a tune." 21 years, he said again, as if I had not spoken, as if the number were a thing he had to carry to the center of the court and set down, where he could feel the size of it. And then he lowered his head to the flagstones, and the ears stayed open, and I understood, old as I am, slow as I am, what was being asked of me by a creature that could not ask. I finished the basket. I hummed the weaver's walk-through, the turn and all twice, while the frost let go of the wall stones, and the sun came over the east roof and lit the court gold. And when I gathered my pins and my empty basket, I made myself say it, because some kindnesses are worthless unless they are scheduled. "The roof in the east yard will be weeks yet," I said. "I'll be back Thursday. Wash days Thursday and Monday." His ear moved. He said nothing. I went out through the arch and stood in the corridor a moment, with my heart going like a hare. And that was when I learned that the worst thing I could have feared about the pledge court was not in the court at all. It was in the corridor, wearing a steward's coat, holding the quarterly ledger, looking at me as if I had walked out of a burning building carrying the fire. "Mrs. Vane," said Mr. Pell, "tell me you did not speak to it. I have known Pell 12 years. He is not cruel. He is a man who has spent his working life keeping a house that holds the peace of two civilizations in it, the way a cup holds water, and he has done it by making sure nothing ever moves." His hands were shaking around the ledger. "I told it to mind the sheets," I said. "Article 9, he said, and his voice cracked on the word, "exists so that no one, Etta, can ever claim the surety was interfered with. Do you understand what you risk? Not your post, the Concord. One report, one Wingard envoy claiming we tampered with their pledge, and everything your generation buried stays buried for nothing. The roof," I said, "is on the floor of the east yard. The linens must dry somewhere. Take it up with the roof." I am not proud of that answer. It was the answer of a tired woman who did not yet understand what she had started. Pell stared at me and wrote nothing in his ledger, and I marked that even then that he wrote nothing and said, "Thursday. Use the court if you must. Hang your wash and come out. But Etta, do not speak to it again." I said something that was not quite a promise, and he heard that it was not quite a promise, and we both let it stand, because we had 12 years of respect between us and neither of us wanted to spend it in a corridor. Thursday I went back. You knew that already. Everyone knows that now. It is the one fact about me that has crossed the void to places I will never see. But you should know it plainly, the way it happened. There was no decision in it that felt like a decision. There was a basket of wash, and a line in the sun, and an old blind soldier who had not heard music in 21 years lying in a stone box at the center of my place of work. And there are women, my mother was one and her mother before, who simply cannot leave a thing like that be. It is something lower and older than courage or charity, the thing that makes you feed a stray, the thing that makes you talk to a man on a bench who has stopped expecting to be talked to. I hung the wash, I hummed the round, and when the basket was empty, I did not gather my pins and go. I sat down on the bench by the arch. There had always been a bench, which should have told all of us something, that whoever built the court built it with a bench, and I said to the great gray shape across the flagstones, my husband used to say the weather 2 days out, and he was never wrong. "Frost tomorrow," he'd say, and there'd be frost. I never learned the trick of it, but it'll snow before the week's out. I'd stake my kettle on that. Even I can smell that much coming. The white eyes opened. The head, slow as a drawbridge, came around. "Before dark," he said. "It will snow before dark." It snowed before dark. And that is how it began, not with a rescue, not with a wonder, but with a laundress and a siege dragon arguing about the weather, both of them right. Only one of them knowing yet that the stones of that court were not as deaf as the house believed. The snow that came before dark stayed 3 days, and when I crossed the court on Monday, the drifts had been pushed back from the center in long sweeps, as if a great tail had cleared the flagstones around the laundry line. He had done it in the night. He never said so, and I never asked, but the line hooks were clear, and the bench was clear, and there was a body length of swept stone between the bench and the place where he liked to lie, exactly the distance a person would walk. That was the second thing he ever gave me, after the snow forecast. I keep an honest count of these, because in the months after, when the house was deciding whether I was a fool or a criminal, everyone spoke as if the kindness had run only one way. It never did. It never does. It is a current, and it needs 2 poles, and it was flowing in that court long before anyone with a title was watching. Monday I brought the wash, and a thing I did not strictly need, the almanac. Harlan's almanac, the yearly one printed in the valley towns, frost tables and seeds and the moon's business, which I had gone on buying for 8 years after he died the way you go on setting a kettle for, 2. I sat on the bench while the sheets dried and read the week aloud. Waxing moon, hard frost through Thursday. A note about keeping hens in. Your almanac is wrong about Thursday, he said. The frost breaks Wednesday night. The wind is already turning under the high country. I can feel it in my teeth, in your teeth. Pressure, he said. A dragon's teeth are hollow at the root. We are barometers that bite, little keeper. The almanac measures last year. I measure tomorrow. Little keeper. I let it pass that first time, and by the time I thought to object to it, it had become my name in his mouth, and objecting would have been like objecting to the sunrise. And he was right about Wednesday. He was right about everything that came down out of the sky all winter. I started reading him the almanac just so he could correct it, because I learned, slowly, the way you learn a man at a bench, that being right about the weather was the last work he had, and that a creature built for work suffers worse from idleness than from chains. He was built for work. I have to say what he was, because the warmth of what came later does not make sense unless you hold the cold of it first. Sevrath, I did not have his name yet. That comes later, and it cost more than anything else in this account, was a siege dragon of the Osran ascendancy. Not a courier, not a warden, not one of the slim sky dancers we used to see over the ridge before the war. Siege stock. Bred up over 40 generations to be the argument that ended walled cities. There were never more than a dozen of them in the whole span war, and the histories I was never bookish enough to read say that when one of them came down the line, garrison surrendered to the shadow before the body arrived. I asked him once, deep in that winter, what he had done in the war. The court was white and the sheets had frozen on the line like panes of glass, and by then the wash was a formality and we both knew it. He was quiet so long I thought the question had been a wound. Then he said, "Do you know what a siege is, little keeper? It is the slowest violence. It is violence with the patience of weather. My flight did not burn cities. We sat before them, in sight of their walls, and we were what was coming. I spent the war being seen. I was the argument. The burning was only for the ones who would not finish the sentence." "And the tell and span," I said, "because even laundresses know that name. We lost the bridge towns in one night, and the sky over the high country glowed 2 days. The tell and span," he said, "is where the argument was answered." And he turned his head so that the light fell on the white of his eyes, and I understood that he had not been born blind, and I did not ask the rest of it. Some doors you let the other person open. He opened it weeks later in pieces, the way scarred men do. The incendiary lines our side fired at the close of that battle, the light that took his eyes in the same hour the armistice flags went up on both ridges. Blinded by the last hour of the war, there is a cruelty in timing that no treaty has a clause for, but I have run ahead. The count of given things, that winter, the swept snow, the weather every visit traded like coin for my almanac readings, and in the 3rd week of it, the thing that changed me from a trespasser into whatever it is I became, the morning I saw the scale bind. He had been rubbing his jaw against the east wall. I heard it before I came through the arch, a grinding like a millstone, and when I rounded the sheets I saw the wall scored white and his jaw scored red, raw at the hinge, where a patch of scale the size of a serving tray had lifted and crusted and gone wrong. Scale bind, the ascendancy calls it. Dead scale that will not shed, binding against the live skin beneath, and it itches the way a healing burn itches, which is to say it is a small madness. A sighted dragon grooms it loose in a day. A flighted dragon has flightmates to reach what he cannot. A blind, cropped, solitary dragon in a stone box has a wall. He froze when he heard me stop. The great head came down off the wall like a boy caught at the jam. "How long has it been like that?" I said. "It passes," he said. "How long?" "Since the leaves turned. 4 months." I went back through the arch and I heard the court go silent behind me in a way I can only call braced, as if he believed. And why would he not believe that I had finally seen the thing that would make the visit stop? The unbeautiful animal fact of him, the wound that was not noble. I crossed to the laundry, took the big zinc basin, filled it at the boiler with water as hot as my hands could stand, poured in white vinegar from the kitchen stores while the undercook stared at me, took the stiffest brush from the rack and a stack of clean rags, and carried the whole lot back across 2 corridors, my arms shaking, my mind empty of everything except that it was Thursday, and on Thursdays I dealt with what the house had let go. He smelled the vinegar before I reached the arch and reared his head up, and I will tell you what I told the hearing, word for word, because it is the truest sentence I know about that whole winter. I did not decide to wash a siege dragon's scars. I decided that nothing in my care goes 4 months itching. The dragon was incidental. The care was not. Hold still, I said. This will be warm, then it will sting, then it will be better. That's the order it goes in. Little keeper, he said, and there was something in the voice I had not heard before, a fracture line. The Concord says you are to be kept, I said. This is keeping. Hold still. And the argument that ended walled cities held still. He lowered his jaw onto the flagstones, slow, the way a mountain would kneel if a mountain could, and turned the bound scale toward me, and for the better part of an hour I worked the hot vinegar water into 4 months of dead scale with a scrubbing brush, both hands, my whole weight, while his breath went past me like a tide and the steam came up off his jaw in the cold air. The bind let go all at once, the way these things do, a sheet of dead scale the size of a tray coming loose with a crack, and underneath it the new scale was soft gray and bright as pewter, and the sound he made, I will not try to write the sound he made. There are sounds that are private, even when a whole empire later claims them as history. When it was done, he lay with his jaw in the wreck of the basin water and the white eyes half shut, and he said quietly, conversationally, as if remarking on the weather we both loved, I had forgotten that hands were good for anything but the war. Then you've known the wrong hands, I said, and wrung out the last rag and hung it on the line with the sheets where it steamed. That was the visit David saw. The young porter, 17, sent to the chute with the feed barrow at the wrong hour because the kitchens were behind. He came around the south wall, saw the laundress of a courthouse up to her elbows in a siege dragon's jaw, dropped the barrow handle, and was gone. By supper it was in the kitchens. By morning it was everywhere a house's whispering goes, which is everywhere, and Mr. Pell came to the linen room with his face the color of the sheets and a paper in his hand. And this time he had written in the ledger, because this time not writing would have cost him his post. A formal note, he said, in the house log, contact between staff and the surety, dates unspecified, nature unspecified. I have made it as small a true entry can be made, Edda. I have spent 30 years making true things small enough to keep this house standing, and I am telling you I cannot make this one any smaller, and it is going to be read. The quarterly inspection is in 5 weeks. Corvey reads the log before every inspection. Do you understand me now? I understand the frost broke Wednesday, I said, like he said it would. And I understand his jaw was raw to the meat for 4 months in a house full of people sworn to keep him. Write that in the log too, if there's room. Pell looked at me for a long moment, and what was in his face was not anger. I have thought about it often since. It was envy, I think, of a kind so old he did not recognize it. The envy of a careful man for a person who has found the one thing they will not be careful about. 5 weeks, he said, and left me with the linens. And in the court the boundary stones, which I had noticed all that winter, were never quite cold and faintly humming. Dragon masonry, I had thought, the way you think about things beyond your station. The boundary stones kept their own counsel and carried everything, every word, every brushstroke, every verse of the weaver's walk, out and up and across the dark between worlds, to a listener I could not have imagined if I had been told to try. 5 weeks is a long time and no time at all. I will tell you what we did with it, because the house spent those weeks waiting for an inspection, and the court spent them becoming something no clause had a word for. I learned the shape of his days. He slept little. Old soldiers and old women share that, and he kept the hours of the sky he could not see. At dawn he faced east. He could not have told you he did it. The body keeps faiths the mind is buried. So I moved my visits to first light when the wash allowed, and I began, without planning to, the practice that of everything I did would be the one the ascendancy later put into their records, the small thing, the thing that cost me nothing and weighed more than all the rest. I told him the colors. It started as filler the way the best things start. A morning in late winter, the whole eastern sky gone the color of a peach and brandy, and me on the bench with the basket not yet started, and I said, not even thinking you'd want to see this. There's a color on the high country this morning like fruit and spirits. Gold at the bottom of it and rose going up, and the snow on the ridge has caught it so the whole edge of the world looks lit from inside. The silence had a different texture to it. I looked over, and he had gone absolutely still, the way he had the first time I hummed, and I understood with a drop in my stomach that I had blundered into another room of the long house of his hunger. 21 years. No one had told him the colors in 21 years. The last sky I saw, he said at length, was the Tellin span burning. That is the picture I have carried. 21 years of one picture, little keeper. Well, I said when I could trust my voice. That won't do. That's a poor stock of pictures for a long life. So I built him a new stock. Every visit after, before the wash, the colors. Frost blue mornings and bruised gray storm fronts. The green nights of the aurora that come to the high country twice a winter. The exact rust of the kestrel that took to hunting from the court's east wall. I am not a woman of words. I never was. I reached for the things I knew, kitchens, cloth, the valley, and so his new skies were the color of brandied fruit and turned cream, of old copper and wet slate and Harlan's Sunday waistcoat. And he took each one and set it down somewhere in the dark behind the white eyes. And once, after I had described a hailstorm coming up the valley, like a drop bolt of gray silk, he said, "I have flown through that exact silk," in a voice with wonder in it. I had forgotten until now that I have flown through it, and I went home that night and wept at my table, not from sorrow exactly, from the size of what a few words could be worth, and the cheapness of all the years no one had spent them. He gave back. The count of given things, those 5 weeks, grew too long to keep. He learned the sound of each of my kettles from across the compound and would tell me which had been left to overboil. He learned my step on the corridor flags and knew my knee was going before I had admitted it to myself. "Your left footfall has shortened. Little keeper, carry the basket on the other hip." And he was right, and the knee mended. He swept the court before every snow. And on the worst morning of that stretch, when I came through the arch with the news that my sister's husband had died in the valley, suddenly, a man younger than me, he listened to me say it with my hands working a pillowcase into a rope, and then he did the thing I still cannot speak of in company without stopping. He moved his great body around the court, slow as a wall falling, and lay down in a curve with the bench at the center of it, a half-circle of siege dragon, between one grieving laundress and the wind, and he said, "Sit out of the cold. You need not talk this morning. I will do the weather." And he did the weather. For an hour, that voice like the ground speaking named the clouds for me, west to east, while I sat in the lee of him and let my sister's grief and my own old grief have their hour. And if you ask me when it was that the Concord of Vessing truly began, not the signing, the thing itself, the peace, I will tell you it was that morning, and the documents can argue with me when they learn to sweep snow. It was in the 4th week that I asked his name. I had been putting it off the way you put off asking about a scar. He was the surety in every record, on every shoot manifest, in Pell's careful small entries. But you cannot tell a creature the color of the dawn a dozen times and go on calling him Claus. "The documents say the surety," he said when I asked. The voice had gone flat, official, a tone I had not heard from him. Before the documents, the war rolls said First Talon of the Osran line. You may use either. They are both true. They're both jobs, I said. I'm not asking what you were for. I'm asking what you're called. What your people, your nest, what your mother called you when you tracked mud in. The court went so quiet I heard the kestrel shift its grip on the east wall. And when he spoke, the flatness was gone, and what was under it frightened me more than his size ever had, because it was the sound of a thing held shut for 2 decades coming open on its hinge. "There is a name," he said. "That was last spoken on the day they cropped my wings. It is a nest name. It is not for ledgers. Among my people, the nest name lives only in the mouths of those who—" He stopped, the white eyes closed. "Of those who keep you. There has been no one fitting that description, little keeper, for 21 years. I had thought to die with it unspoken, which among the Osran is the worst death, and I had made my peace with the worst death. Tell me," I said. "Severeth," he said. The boundary stones flared warm. I felt it from the bench, 3 paces off, a pulse of heat through the frost, gone in a breath, and I thought, that's queer, and I forgot it, because a dragon was weeping in front of me, if you can call it weeping, when there are no tears in the burned eyes and the only sign is a tremor, along 100 feet of scale, and a sound like deep water moving under ice. I got up off the bench and put my hand on his jaw, on the new pewter scale I had scrubbed bare myself, and I said it back to him. "Severeth, there, it's spoken. And I'll speak it every Thursday and every Monday after, so you can let go of the worst death, because the name's in use again and it's got work to do." I am told, I learned it months later, and the learning bent me over a chair, that 11 light years away, in a hall I will never see, an empress who had not slept properly in 2 decades was woken by her listening warden in the middle of her night. Because the stones of a court on a human world had carried a sound, the wardens were standing orders to escalate above fleet movements and treaty cables alike, the nest name of the ascendant's brood brother, spoken aloud in a human woman's voice for the first time in 21 years. But I knew none of that. What I knew was Thursday, and then the 5th week, and then Protocol Officer Corvey walking the perimeter of the pledge court, with her ledger and her measuring eyes on quarterly inspection, finding what no inspection in 21 years had found. The court was clean. That was the first wrongness, for her. Not clean as weather leaves a place, tended. The drains clear before their schedule. The scoring on the east wall, where a jaw had ground for 4 lonely autumns, gone still and old with no new marks. And the surety himself, when she rounded the south wall with her ledger, not the gray heap of her previous 19 inspections, lying in the one attitude her records described, dormant, responsive to none, but a siege dragon lying with his head toward the arch like a dog that knows the house is ours. his jaw scale bright as struck pewter where dead bind had been scrubbed away by hands, his cropped wings. And she wrote this phrase in the official record, and I have heard it read aloud twice now, and it undoes me both times, folded. As if at rest, rather than as if forgotten. Corvey was not a fool and not a villain. Put that down fairly. She was a protocol officer of the Vessing Concord standing in front of the clearest evidence of attendance upon the surety since the signing, and Article 9 was the load-bearing wall of the only peace her species had, and her hands, Pell told me after, shook worse than his had as she turned back through the house log and found his small true entry and followed it to the linen room like a woman, following a fuse. She found me folding the ambassador's shirts. She had the log under one arm and her ledger under the other, and she stood in my doorway out of breath. This collected woman whom I had never once seen walk fast, and what she said was not procedural at all. I set it down here because it was the first crack in the house's long fear, though none of us knew it yet. And because it was, in its way, the same question I had been answering all winter. She said, Mrs. Vane, the scale on its jaw. Did you that was hands? That was done with hands? Hot water, vinegar, and a brush, I said. The same as I'd give a scalded kettle. Sit down, officer. You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, she said, and sat with the whole Concord under her arm. I think I've seen a breach. What followed Corvey's discovery was not at first the hammer the house expected. It was worse. It was waiting, and waiting splits a house along grains you never knew it had. Corvey did her duty. She was made of duty the way the court was made of stone. Her inspection record went down the wire to the Valley Capitol that same evening, every word true, and the Capitol answered the way capitals do, with silence first, then with questions, then with people. And while the long office filled with questions, the rest of a courthouse made up its own mind, and I watched, that week, a thing I have never forgotten. I watched a household discover its conscience one person at a time, each of them paying a private toll at a private gate. David came first. The boy who had dropped the barrow and run, he stood in the door of the linen room 2 days after the inspection, white as a Monday sheet, and asked me what it was like to touch him. Not it. Him. The pronoun had changed in the kitchens, I learned later, the very night the story of the scrubbed jaw went around. I told David the truth, like touching a stove gone warm, like touching a wall the sun had been on, and that he had been 4 months itching with no hands to help him. The boy went away and said nothing. But the next chute load went down with the feet arranged, not dumped, arranged, the bones laid to one side the way you would plate a meal for a man you respected. And when I next crossed the court, Severeth said, mild as morning, the chute has developed manners, little keeper. Your doing? Not mine, I said, and that was a good day. Because kindness you started and no longer steer is the only proof it took root. The undercook came next, with a directness I had not expected from a man who wept into soup. He stopped me in the kitchen passage, looked both ways like a smuggler, and pressed on me a parcel of beef bones the size of a christening child. For Thursday, he said, if they hang me, they hang me. Then he fled his own courage back to his stoves. I carried the bones to the court under the wash, and Severeth took them with a gravity that would have made the undercook proud for a year, cracked them like spring ice, and observed that the marrow of our cattle wanted only weather and patience to rival the ascendancy's herds, which I reported back word for word, and which kept the kitchens upright through everything that came after. Pell paid the steepest toll and paid it the most quietly. The week before the council arrived from the Capitol, he came to the court itself, Pell, who in 30 years had never once crossed the arch, and stood just inside it with his ledger held against his chest like a breastplate, and watched me hang the wash while the great gray ruin of the ascendancy's worst weapon tracked my steps with his blind face and corrected my almanac. Pell stood for the better part of an hour. Then he said to neither of us in particular, my brother was at the Tellon span. The far side of it from yours, sir. He didn't come home. And the whole court went still, even the kestrel. And Severeth turned to the sound of him and answered in a voice I had not heard before, level and bare. Then he is in my picture, steward. Every man on that bridge is in the last picture I own. I have carried them 21 years. They are carried. Pell left without another word. But that evening the lock on the linen room window, which had stuck since autumn and which I had reported 4 times, was mended, and there was no entry about it in the log, and I understood the grammar of stewards well enough to read what had been said. The Capitol's council arrived on a Friday, Brask and his colleagues and their questions. I was interviewed twice before the hearing proper, in the small office, with a recorder running and a clerk writing besides, as if my answers might bolt for the door. The questions circled and circled. Who initiated contact, what the surety had communicated, whether it had ever spoken of the ascendancy, of the war, of grievances, of intentions. I answered everything truly, and the truth made them more nervous than lies would have, because the truth was whether, almanacs, scale bind, and the color of the morning, and there was no box on their forms for any of it. The young clerk, I never learned her name, stopped writing at one point, in the middle of my describing how you tell a dragon the dawn, and Brask had to say her name twice. I marked that. The forms were on his side, the room was coming to mine. And then, 3 days before the hearing, the storm. It came up the valley the way the worst spring storms do, in the dark with no almanac's leave, wind enough to lift slates, hail going to sleet, the compound shutters going like gunfire. I woke past midnight to the sound and lay there counting the roofs in my head, and then I heard, under the wind, long and low, a sound from the heart of the house that I knew in my bones, because I had heard its smaller cousin the day the scale bind let go. He was calling. Not roaring. The histories that say roaring were not there. Calling. The way the old call out in hospital wards at night to anyone. I will not pretend there was a debate. I put a coat over my nightdress and went down through the dark house, and I was not the only one moving. I passed David on the kitchen stair with storm lantern, not even surprised to see me, and at the arch, in the wild dark, I found the gate Pell had been ordered to keep locked standing open. The steward himself beside it in his dressing gown, with the key in his hand and his face turned away, studying some fascinating feature of the corridor wall. 30 years of making true things small. He had simply made the lock small enough not to exist for one night. The court was chaos, hail off the walls, the line snapped, sheets gone into the dark like ghosts, and at the center of it the great shape turning and turning, wings half spread into a wind they could not hold, and I understood at one look what no record would have told me. A storm is a sighted thing's misery and a blind thing's madness. Every sound was an attack out of nowhere. 20 years of them alone, Sevrath. I put it into the wind the way you pitch a call across a fairground, and the turning stopped. The head came around, hail glancing off it, and found me. It's Etta, it's only weather. You told me yourself it would break by morning. You, your own teeth, Tuesday. You called it before the almanac. It's only your own forecast come to visit. Now put your head down out of the wind, you great barometer, and I'll sit in the lee of you till it's done with us. And the first Talon of the Osran line put his head down on the streaming stones and curved his body to the bench the way he had the morning of my sister's grief, and I sat in the dry of him in my coat and nightdress with David's lantern, and we did the storm together, west to east, gust by gust, until the sleet went over to rain, and the rain went soft, and somewhere in the middle of it, with my hand on his jaw and the worst of the wind shouldering past us both, I sang, not hummed, sang, words and all, the weaver's walk and then the others, every wash day round my mother ever taught me, into the storm and the warm iron dark, because there was no one to hear and he needed it, and that, I would have sworn, was the whole arithmetic of that night. There was someone to hear. There was always someone to hear. 11 light years off in the small hours of her own night, an Empress sat alone by a listening stone with 3 fleets worth of cares set aside on the floor, and heard a human voice sing her brother through a storm, and made, I am told, the decision about the renewal date before the rain in the court had stopped. But I knew nothing of stones that night. I only knew the storm broke by morning, exactly as his teeth had promised, and that I went in, soaked through the coat at dawn, and slept an hour, and rose to face the hearing, and that I would do the whole night again at twice the cost, and so, I suspect, would Pell and Davitt and his lantern. The hearing was held in the long office on the first day of spring, which is the kind of joke the calendar plays and means nothing by. Present, Ambassador Idra Hale, who had signed nothing in her life without reading it twice and had run a courthouse for 9 years on the principle that boredom was victory. Protocol Officer Corvey with her ledger. Mr. Pell with the house log in his 30 years. A treaty counsel named Brask, sent up from the valley capital, who spoke of me in the third person while I was in the room. And one laundress, in her good dress, with her hands folded, listening to learned people read Article 9 aloud as if it were scripture and I were the heresy. Brask laid it out the way councils do, building the gallows plank by plank and calling it shelter. Contact, sustained, deliberate, concealed. Physical interference with the surety's person, he meant the vinegar. Provision of unauthorized materials, he meant the almanac. Unrecorded verbal exchange, ongoing, nature unknown, he meant the colors, and I remember thinking, there is no box on any form for what that man just called nature unknown. The nature was that nobody had told a blind soldier what the sky looked like for 21 years. Write that in the margin. The exposure, Brask said, is total. If the ascendancy learns that a member of staff has had unsupervised access to the surety, months of it, they may claim tampering under Article 9 and declare the Concord void. 21 years of peace, Ambassador, against one woman's sentimentality. The remedy is straightforward. The contact is severed today. The staff member is dismissed and removed from the compound. The record is managed. Managed. I have washed things out of linen that smelled better than that word sounded. Hale had not spoken in some time. She had the house log open in front of her at Pell's small entry and her reading glasses up, and she said, without looking at anyone, Mrs. Vane, "You've heard counsel. Have you anything to say?" I had promised myself I would be brief, because long defenses are guilty defenses. So I said it short. "I hung laundry in the only sun the house had left," I said. "I told an old soldier the weather, and he told me it back, and his forecasts were better. I scrubbed a wound that 4 months of proper procedure had left to rot on a creature this house is sworn to keep. And I told him the color of the morning, because he'd been 21 years with one picture in his head, and the picture was the Tellin span on fire. I looked at Brask. Council calls it exposure. I'm 60 years old, and I've kept house all my life. And I'll tell you what I know about keeping that isn't in your articles. There is no such thing in this world as keeping a living creature unattended. There is only attending to them or neglecting them, and we chose neglect and wrote it down as law and called ourselves careful. If the peace of two civilizations truly stands on a blind prisoner never once hearing a kind word in a stone box, then someone should look at what we built, because that is not a peace, that is a held breath." Nobody said anything. Pell was looking at the table, and I saw the corner of his mouth move, the smallest thing, like a man hearing an old song. Hale took her glasses off. "Counsel's remedy is noted," she said. "Here is mine. Mrs. Vane is barred from the pledge court pending review. The arch is locked. Nothing is managed. Nothing in this house gets buried on my signature." Brass started to speak, and she went over him the way a plow goes over a root. "Because the renewal is in 11 weeks, Counsel. The 20-year reaffirmation, the first since the signing, the ascendancy delegation in this house, in that court, performing the right of inspection on their pledge. They will stand on those stones. If there is anything to find, they will find it. And what they must never find is that we found it first and hid it. That is the one version of this, where the carrier wings come back. The truth is now a structural matter. Pell, the locks. Corvey, your inspection record goes in as written. Every word, including the wings, folded as if at rest rather than as if forgotten, into the permanent record. I did not know whether to thank her or grieve. I did both later in the linen room into a folded towel like a girl. They put a lock on the arch that afternoon. I heard it go on. I had been 14 years in that house. I knew every sound its iron made, and I stood in the linen room with a basket of dry sheets that had dried in the wrong yard, and I let the lock click through me, and then I did what my mother would have done, and her mother before her. I started the next basket. There is a kind of grief that only keeps its shape if you keep working around it. Stonemasons know it. Laundresses know it. I expect ambassadors know it too. Sevrath stopped eating on the second day. David found the chute backed up on Wednesday, the barrow's load still sitting in the bronze throat of it, untouched, and Thursday's load behind that. He reported it to the kitchens to Pell, Pell to Hale, and the house, which had spent 21 years pretending the court was empty, discovered in the space of one morning that every soul in it knew exactly who was in there and exactly why he had turned his face from the food. The undercook wept into the soup. I am told the night porters started leaving the corridor door open by the arch, against all standing instruction, so that the sound of the house could reach the court, small treasons of warmth, breaking out like spring under the snow of all that law. By the 6th day, the duty physician's report used the phrase voluntary decline, which is the kind of phrase that gets a person managed, and Hale called me to the long office alone. She looked older than her office. She had the physician's report in front of her, and Corvey's record, and Pell's log, the whole paper trail of one winter's kindness, and she said, "He is dying of your absence, Mrs. Vane. The counsel in the Capitol tells me the clause is clear, and my own eyes tell me the clause is killing the thing it was written to keep. I have no procedure for this. So I am asking you, off every record in this house, what does he need?" "What anyone needs," I said. "To know the door opens. You can keep your lock, Ambassador. Move it to the inside of my visits. Bar the court all you like between Thursdays. But the keeping has to have hands in it, or it isn't keeping. It's storage. And storage is what's killing him." Hale was quiet a long moment. Then she said something I have thought about every day since, because it cost her more than it cost me, and because it was the moment the house itself changed sides. "When I took this post," she said, "I was told the surety was the price of the peace. Paid once, at the signing. It isn't, is it? It's being paid every day, in there, in installments, by him. We just stopped watching the ledger." She closed the folder. "Go in, Mrs. Vane. Supervised, recorded, and the record true. And God help me with the Capitol." I went in within the hour, with Corvey at the arch as witness, and the lock loud in the opening, and I crossed the flagstones to where he lay too. Flat, the great frame gone slack over its bones in a way that 6 days should not have managed and 21 years explained entirely, and the white eyes turned to my step, and before he could spend strength on speaking, I sat down against his jaw, where the pewter scale was, and I told him the colors. "You'll want this morning's stock," I said, and my voice did what it did and I let it. "There's a sky out there like washed wool, Sevrath. Gray, but the good gray, the gray with light behind it, the color of a kettle before the polish. And the kestrel's back on your east wall with a mind to nest, so you'll be a landlord by May. And the frost is done. You'd have called it before any almanac, you old barometer. The frost is done, the year's turned. It's all still out here." It waited. The breath came in deeper. The head turned a few degrees, the way the great hinge of him turned for nothing on this earth but a voice he knew, and Corvey stood at the arch watching a siege dragon come back toward his food like a tide turning and writing, because Hales had said the record true, every word. "You came back," he said. "I was kept out," I said. "There's a difference, and you know it, and I'll thank you to eat something before we argue the finer points." He ate. The house breathed. And 11 light years away, I know it now. I will never get used to knowing it. The listening wardens of the Osran Ascendancy escalated a second transcript to the Ascendant's own hearing, flagged with the oldest priority their order possesses. And the reply that came back down through the dark to the delegation masters said simply, "Move the renewal forward. I will see this court myself." The weeks of supervised visits changed the house more than the winter had, because now the keeping had witnesses, and witnesses are how a private kindness becomes a public fact. Corvey took the supervision herself, most days. She stood at the arch with her ledger. The first sessions in full procedure, and procedure, I learned, has a half-life when exposed to weather arguments. By the second week, she had moved from the arch to the wall. By the third, she had a stool. She recorded everything, the record true, and somewhere in those weeks, the record itself changed under her stylus without one rule being broken. She began taking the colors down verbatim. I found it out by accident, glancing at her page as I passed, expecting clauses, and finding instead in her strict protocol hand, ZO 7-1. Keeper reports sky as turned cream going to pewter, rain on it by noon. Surety disputes pewter, concurs on rain. I asked her about it, and Corvey, who did not blush, blushed, and said that an inaccurate record was a breach of her own articles, and the morning's exact color was now demonstrably treaty business. She said it daring me to smile. I did not smile until I was back across the court, so it had been all winter. The treaty had only now caught up. Ambassador Hale came on the third Thursday. Unannounced in her plain coat, no counsel at her back, she stood at the arch like every other newcomer, getting the size of him wrong and then wronger as her eye learned the scale of what the house had kept folded behind one wall for 2 decades. I went on with the wash. I had decided long since that the court worked on visitors best when it was working. So she heard it all plain. The almanac read aloud, wrong about Friday. The correction from his teeth, the small argument, the kestrel report, eggs due any morning, by his reckoning of the female's weight on the wall. And at the end, the colors, because the light was doing something over the high country that week. A green gold edge to the gray that I had been trying all morning to place, and it was Sevrath, blind Sevrath, who placed it for me, out of the stock of his own lost skies. Storm light through a wheat year, little keeper. You are describing the color of a good harvest about to be rained on. We had a word for it in the flights. We did not fly under it. Hale stayed an hour and spoke twice. Once early, the formal greeting protocol required of her, to which Sevrath bowed his great blind head. Exactly as far as protocol returned, not a degree more, 21 years of nothing having taught him the full vocabulary of nothing. And once at the end at the arch, on her way out. "Not to me," she said, "sir. The clause was signed before my time, but I hold its office, so the apology is mine to make. We mistook leaving you alone for leaving you in peace. It will be in my dispatch to your sovereign that the distinction was taught to this house by its laundress." Then she was gone, coat and all, before either of us could answer, and Sevrath was still for a long while, and finally said that one signs small and means it large. Mind her, little keeper. Houses are weather too, and she is the turning kind. The dispatch, that was the iron under those soft weeks, and I felt it even on the good mornings. Hale had decided the day of the hearing that the ascendancy must hear of the contact from us, first, plainly, before the renewal put their delegation on our stones, and the drafting of that confession occupied the long office for a month the way slow surgery occupies a hospital. Brask and his colleagues fought it line by line. I was shown a draft once for the facts to be checked, and I sat in the long office reading lawyer's language about myself, the staff member in question, acting without authorization but without malice, until I came to the paragraph where their careful machine had to describe what actually happened in the court, and there the language simply broke down and told the truth, because there was no other way to say it. She washed the bound scale from his jaw. She reads him the almanac. He is calmer and eats and speaks. I handed it back and said the facts were right, and Brask asked, fishing one last time for his version of events, whether I wished to add any mitigating context. I said the context was 4 months of itching and 21 years of nobody, and he could mitigate that however his office liked. I asked Severeth that same week, the question I had been circling since the storm. What would happen? To him, not to us. The house only ever asked it about us, when his people learned a human had crossed the clause. He took it the way he took all the heavy ones, with a long silence that was working, not refusing. You are asking whether kindness can be a sentence, he said at last. Among my people, the pledge is a sacred office. I was given to the silence the way your kind gives certain men to a tower, and the silence was the point, proof that we could pay an unbearable price and keep paying it. So there will be those in the hall of the Osran who say the pledge was spoiled, that the coin was handled and is no longer true. The blind head turned toward me, and the white eyes, which could not narrow, narrowed all the same somewhere behind their frost. And there is one who will not say that, one whose arithmetic was always older than the office. I will tell you no more about that one, little keeper, because hope is the heaviest thing I own, and I will not hand you the carrying of it. But when the wings come, and they will come, dispatch or no dispatch, do not let the house believe otherwise. Stand where I can hear you, and let what comes, come. Nothing lands in this court that I cannot put my body between you, and that is not a soldier's boast. It is the only use I have left for what they bred me to be, and it would be, he searched, the way he searched when our language ran short of him, it would be in honor of the nest. Let it stand at that. Let it stand at that. I did not understand the half of what he had told me, and I record my incomprehension honestly, the way I have recorded everything else, because the not knowing was the truth of those weeks. The whole house drafting and bracing and reading the sky, and the answer already on its way down to us through the dark, written before our confession had cleared the valley, by a listener who had never once needed our paperwork to know how her pledge was kept. The dispatch reached a courthouse on a Tuesday in the 5th week of spring, and I can tell you the hour, because I was in the kitchens when the comms clerk came through at a dead run with the flimsy in his fist, and the undercook dropped a tray of molds, and nobody moved to pick them up. The renewal, set for midsummer, was moved to the 3rd week of spring, 2 weeks away, and where the protocol annex had for months listed the delegation as a treaty master, 2 wing guards, and a recording warden, the standard shape, the shape of every 5-year courtesy visit since the signing, the amended manifest carried a line that no human document had ever carried. The ascendant herself, Empress, sovereign of the Osran lines, first of the Concord's 2 signatories, who had never in 21 years left her own sky, coming here to a stone house in the high country with a laundry line in its heart. You may imagine what the house believed. The house believed what frightened houses always believe, that the summons was a sentence. The capital flooded us with counsel. Brass came back with colleagues like crows finding a field, and the working theory in the long office was plain enough. The ascendancy had learned of the contact. The early renewal was a pretext. The right of inspection would find the pledge tampered with. Article 9 would be invoked, the Concord declared void, and whatever came after that would come. There was a quieter theory in the kitchens, and the quieter theory was worse, because it was about him and not about us, that the ascent was coming to reclaim the surety's life, which had always been theirs to claim, and that the last thing my winter would buy him was a clean jaw to die with. I took that one to him directly, because I had learned that the only thing he could not endure was being talked around, and the visits were sanctioned now, supervised, recorded, the record true, Corvey or Pell at the arch with the ledger, while a laundress and a siege dragon did the weather. They say she may come for your life, I said. I'd sooner you heard it from me than through a wall. He was quiet a while. The spring wind worked the lines, and the first nest straw showed at the kestrel's wall. My life was the coin of the signing, he said, and there was no fear in it anywhere, which frightened me worse than fear would have. If she comes to spend it, it was always hers to spend, little keeper. That is what a pledge is. But I will tell you what I have not told the wall in 21 years. The head came around, the white eyes finding me by sound. Since the coin was set on the table, no one has asked it whether the table was worth it. You asked. Every Thursday, without knowing it, you asked. Whatever she comes to do, the answer is yes. The table was worth it. The years are paid, and I find late that I would pay them again for one winter of being kept by hands. Write that in your courage somewhere and stop trembling at my door, because your step has gone short again, and it is not your knee. I did not stop trembling, but I wrote it in my courage the way he said, and it held. The advance party came 4 days ahead. 2 wing guards of the Osran line, and I set down plainly what they were, because the histories will smooth them, and they should not be smoothed. They were dragons walking upright, half again the height of a man, scaled in bronze black, wings folded down their backs like cloaks of plate, taloned, horned, with faces nothing human and eyes that took the whole of a room in one slow turn. They spoke our speech with the burr of a furnace behind it. They inspected the great hall, the signing table, the quarters offered their sovereign, and then they came to the arch of the pledge court, and the house held its held breath harder. The senior of them, a warden called Veshkara, stood at the arch a long time. She looked at the laundry line, strung and pinned with the week's sheets, because Hale, in the bravest administrative decision I ever witnessed, had ruled that the court would be presented as it was used, nothing struck, nothing staged, the truth structural. She looked at the bench. She looked at the swept stones, the bright pewter patch on the jaw of the first talon of the Osran line, the clear drains, the kestrel's nest. She looked, longest of all, at me, where I stood by my basket with my heart going like a hare again, and her eyes were the eyes of a hawk being shown something a hawk has no file for. Then she crossed the court, the first of their kind to set foot in it since the signing, and she put her taloned hand flat against one of the boundary stones, the way you check a kettle, and she said something to Sevrath in their own tongue, 2 words low, and Sevrath answered with one. And Veshkara turned and walked out past me and stopped and said, in our speech not loudly, "The stones carry sound, keeper of this court. They have always carried sound. Consider before the 3rd day everything they have heard," and was gone with her silence, leaving me to sit down hard on the bench while 21 years of architecture rearranged itself in my head. The stones carried sound, the warm stones, the stones that flared when his name was spoken. I had hummed half a winter of wash-day rounds into a listening post. I had argued almanacs told the colors of the morning, said Sevrath, every Thursday and Monday like a bell, into stones built by the ascendancy at the signing, so that, and this is the piece I got wrong, sitting on that bench, and I record my wrongness honestly, so that I assumed they could spy on their enemies. It did not occur to me, that whole sleepless night, that a mother civilization might build ears into a stone box for the same reason a mother leaves, a door ajar, not to watch the enemy, to hear across 11 light years whether their own was crying. Sevrath said nothing of it when I asked. He had gone very still those last days, the stillness of the dawn facing, and all he said was, "She will tell yourself, it is not mine to spend," which I took for dread, and which I understand now was something else entirely, the thing under the stillness. He had worked out what the stones meant about the years of his keeping, and he was carrying the size of it to the center of himself and setting it down. She came at midday on the 3rd day, and the histories have the spectacle of it, the carrier wings coming over the high country in a formation that blacked 1/10 of the sky, the escort wheeling off at the boundary, the descent of the sovereign of the Osran lines onto the great lawn of a human, diplomatic compound, while every soul in it stood out on the gravel because nobody could have stayed indoors and lived the rest of their life knowing they had. I was at the back in my good dress between Pell and David. You will want to know what an Empress of Dragons looks like, and I will fail. But here is the laundress's version. She was gold below and bronze above, like the year's 2 best hours had been given scale and breadth. She was smaller than Sevrath, and it had never occurred to one soul in that house that anything could be smaller than Sevrath and still stop the heart. And she came down out of the noon with a control so absolute that the gravel did not jump, and folded a wingspan that crossed the lawn and was still. Ambassador Hale stepped forward with the right words of welcome that the protocol annex had drilled into her and got 3 of them out. "There will be time for the table," said Anvessa, ascendant of the Osran, in our speech in a voice that made Sevrath sound like a son's. Her head turned, the whole gold engine of it, toward the east range of the house, toward the arch no one had pointed to. "Before any signing, I will see how our pledge was kept. Where is the court?" And then, and the official record confirms it, because Corvey was recording, the record true to the last. The ascendant of the Osran lines crossed the gravel, passed the assembled diplomatic corps of 2 civilizations, and stopped and brought her head down level with one member of the household staff, 60 years old, in her good dress, hands folded the way you fold them when the alternative is shaking. "You," said the Empress of Dragons, "would be the one who hums. There are moments a person rehearses for all their life without knowing it. Every kettle I had ever answered, every linen count I had ever given straight to a housekeeper twice my rank, every hard winter morning I had stood up into anyway, they were all, it turns out, rehearsal for standing in gravel with the eye of an empress filling my sky and answering her like a Thursday. I'd be the one who hums." I said, "Etta Vane, ma'am, I keep the linens. The court's this way, if you'll follow. The footing's good, but the arch is low for you, I'd say, by half a wing." A sound went through the wing guards behind her. A furnace crackle I took at first for offense, and learned within the hour was their laughter. And Vessa's eye held me a moment longer, an eye the size of the zinc basin, gold around a black like deep well water, and in it nothing cruel, but a pressure of attention I have never felt before or since, as if my whole winter were being read in its original language. "The footing's good. she repeated low, as if tasting the manners of it. Walk ahead of me, Edivane, keeper of linens. You have the only precedence in this house that interests me. So it was that the assembled core of two civilizations, ambassadors and treaty masters and council and crows, walked behind a laundress through their own house to the arch of the pledge court. I only knew the corridor had never been so long, and that on the other end of it, facing east, in the noon sun, lay the whole reason none of it frightened me the way it should have. He had heard her come down. He had heard the carrier wings. Of course he had. He heard kettles across a compound, and when we came through the arch he was up, the great frame raised off the stones for the first time I had ever seen, the cropped wings half lifted, the blind white eyes turned toward the noise of our coming and absolutely still. The sheets snapped on the line between them. I had hung wash that morning. The truth structural, Hale had said, and the truth was, it was Monday. And Vesa entered the court her treaty had built, and stopped, and for a long moment the two of them stood in the sun with 21 years between them and nobody breathed. Brother, she said. The word was in our speech. She said it in our speech, the record notes, so that every human present would carry it out of that court and there would never again be a version of events without it. I heard Corby's stylus stop. I heard the held breath of the house break in a wave back through the arch. Brood brother, the surety. The coin on the table at Vessing, the price of the piece, the ascendant had paid the signing with her own nest. You have come early, Severeth said. His voice had a thing in it I had never put there in all our winter, in any weather. The renewal was for midsummer. The renewal, said Aunt Vesa, is paper. Paper keeps. Other things do not. She came forward across the flagstones, past the line, the sheets brushing her gold flank wet, and she walked, and this undid me before a word of explanation was spoken. She walked the swept path. The body-length lane of clean stone between the bench and his place, the lane he had kept clear all winter for one woman's boots, and an Empress's tread fit inside it like a hand into an old glove. She knew it was there. She knew everything that was there. She stopped before him, head to blind head, and said, 21 years ago I set you on a table I did not have the right to set you on, because our sire was dead, and the war was lost in everything but name. And the Humans' Council asked for a pledge of consequence, and I gave them the only thing I owned whose loss would never stop costing me. That was the arithmetic, brother. A surety must be a thing the giver cannot bear to lose, or it secures nothing. You were the proof of my good faith precisely because giving you was wrong. I have lived inside that arithmetic since. I built the stone so I would know how you were kept. I have heard this court every day for 21 years. I know, he said. I worked it out this spring when the wash day songs began going somewhere. A tremor moved down the length of him. Sister, tell me what the stones were like. Before, the court was full. 2 delegations, the ambassador, the corps, and I tell you the Empress of the Osran lines answered him as if no one else stood on the earth. Weather, she said. 20 years of weather and chute bronze and drains. 4,000 inspections of footsteps that circled and never crossed. I heard you grind your jaw against that wall through one whole autumn, and I sat in my hall with the reports of 3 fleets in front of me and could do nothing that would not break the table you bought us. Little brother, I memorized the sound of you giving up. I had begun to compose the rites. Her head turned. The gold eye came around, and it came to me, and the whole court turned with it. And then on an ordinary morning in winter, the stones brought me a human woman, telling my brother to mind the sheets. I did not lower my eyes. I had decided in the corridor, walking ahead of her, that whatever came, I would answer it the way I had answered the court itself all winter, as work that was mine to do. And then the weaver's walk, and Vesa said. 4 lines and a turn. And then the almanac read aloud wrong about Thursday, and then hot water, vinegar, and a brush, and a sound out of my brother that I had not heard since before his wings were cropped. The cropping was ours, Edivane. We did it ourselves at the signing, our own right of surrender. So the wound would at least be given by hands that grieved it. I tell you this so you will know we are a people who understand exactly what was done in this court and exactly what it weighs. And then, on the 4th Thursday of winter, the stones brought me his name, his nest name, spoken aloud in this court, by your voice. Do you know? No. You cannot know what that is. Among our kind, the nest name lives only in the mouths of those who keep you, and when those mouths are gone, the name dies before the body, and we call that the worst death. For 21 years I have been one of 2 mouths in the universe that held my brother's name, and I am forbidden by my own treaty to cross the stones and speak it. The gold eye came closer. The voice dropped to something that the record marks, simply, as inaudible to most present. I was most present, I record it. You gave him back his name with a basket of washing on your hip. I have crossed 11 light years to look at you. Ma'am, I said when I could. He gave me back a few things as well. We kept account, him and me. It runs fairly even. The furnace crackle again from the guards at the arch, and from her, this time, a long, slow exhalation that smelled of hot iron and cut grass, which I am told is among the Osran, what it is among us when something tight in the chest finally lets go. She straightened to her full height, and the noon sun took her. And the voice that came out of her then was the treaty voice, the one that carried to every corner and every ledger. Hear the finding of the right of inspection, she said. For 20 years, the pledge of the Concord of Vessing was kept according to the letter of Article 9, fed, sheltered, and untouched. The stones bear witness, and the stones say this: the letter was killing him. He was storage, and the storage was a slow grave. And both signatories share that shame equally, for both wrote the clause believing care could be forbidden as a safety measure. Then one keeper of linens broke the letter every Thursday and Monday for a winter, and the stones say this also: she is the only party to this treaty who ever performed it. Kindness is not tampering. Kindness is the only proof of good faith that cannot be forged. Paper can lie. The almanac can lie. A scrubbing brush at the jaw of a creature who could end you at 60 in the frost, uncounted and unpaid, that cannot lie. The Concord stands. It has never stood so well. And Article 9, the gold head turned to Ambassador Hale, comes out of it today, Ambassador, and the surety comes off the table, discharged with honor. Because as of this hour I have something better than a hostage to prove my good faith, and yours. I have a court where a human sang to the worst of my weapons until he remembered he was my brother. Build your peace on that. It bears more weight than he does. Hale, who had not been told one word of this in advance, who had 11 counsels at her back urging caution and 11 keys, looked once at me. I will always believe she looked at me, and answered with the shortest sentence of her diplomatic life, the one that is now carved over the arch: agreed, witnessed, done. And then Anvessa, ascendant of the Osran lines, sovereign of 3 fleets and 40 generations, turned back to me, and before the core of 2 civilizations she lowered her great gold head, not to the assembly, the record is precise, the head lowered to the laundress, and she spoke the words that follow me into every room I will ever enter for the rest of my life. Among our kind, those who keep another's name are themselves named for it. Hear hers, Kethsal, the song that reached the dark. Let the rolls of the Osran carry it beside the first Alon's own, for as long as either is spoken, Edda Vane, Kethsal, keeper of my brother. The court was silent. The sheets cracked once on the line like flags. And Severeth, who had stood through the whole of it still as the quarry he was. Severeth said in the voice like ground speaking, with 21 years and 1 winter in it together at last: Sister, before any other business, leave the line hooks where they are. She has washed to hang on Thursday. That evening the house held the strangest supper in the history of either civilization. The histories have the treaty and the right, but the evening belongs to the kitchens. The Osran delegation did not dine apart, as the protocol annex had planned. Anvessa overturned the seating with one sentence: I have eaten 21 years of state dinners. I am told this house has a cook who sends my brother marrow bones like tribute, and I will eat what the house eats. And so the long hall was abandoned, and trestles went up on the great lawn in the spring dusk, and the undercook, given 90 minutes' notice that he was feeding an Empress, produced the valley's plain glory: bread, beef, root mash, and the dark beer the riggers drank, and stood behind it all sweating like a man at his own trial. The wing guards ate standing, as their kind do, towering over the trestles in the lamplight, and somewhere in the second hour one of them was persuaded by David, who 4 months earlier had dropped a barrow and run, to try the dark beer, and pronounced it, in that furnace voice, with the gravity of a treaty finding, an ambush, and asked for another. The laughter that went up off that lawn, 2 species of it, tangled together. I have heard finer music. I have not heard better. I did not sit long at the trestles. I had a court to see to. The day's wash was still on the line through all of history happening around it, and that is where the Empress found me, at dusk, alone among the sheets. I heard no footfall. For all their size, they walk like falling snow when they choose. I turned from the line, and she was simply there, gold gone to bronze in the last light, filling the court her treaty had built, and she said, Leave the linens among Kethsal. I have a question I did not want paper near. I left the linens. She settled herself, and I saw with a small shock that she settled into his place, the worn stones at the center where his body had lain for 21 years, fitting herself to the shape of her brother's exile, the way you sit in a dead man's chair to know him. And she asked her question. The stones brought me everything, she said, and everything is not enough. The stones carry sound. They do not carry why. So tell me, keeper of linens, because I have crossed 11 light years and rewritten a treaty on the answer, and I find I still do not have it. You knew what he was. The histories were free to you. The whole war was free to you. Your own bridge towns burned 2 days' ride from this house. He was the argument that ended cities, and you are one woman with a basket, And Article 9 gave you every right and every reason to walk past that arch for the rest of your life the way your whole species walked past it for 21 years. Why did you stop? I have been asked it many times since, and people always want one of two answers, courage or sainthood. The Empress wanted neither. She wanted the works of the thing, and she got the truth which I had had a winter to find the shape of. Because the roof fell on the east yard, I said, and the only son was his. That's the start of it, plain, and don't let anyone gild it. But you're asking why I stopped and stayed stopped. Ma'am, I kept house 40 years. Keeping is my trade like war was his. And a keeper walks her rooms. That's the whole craft of it. You walk every room you're answerable for, or rot starts where you don't walk. This house had a room it never walked. 14 years I went past that arch being told the not walking was the law, and then one Thursday I was inside it with a basket, and I saw what 14 years of not walking does to a living thing, and after that it was never a question of why him. It was a question of how I'd ever again call myself a keeper of anything if I left a room of mine to rot because the rot was legal. I looked at her, gold eye to old eye, and gave her the last of it. You built the stones to listen, ma'am. Same trade. You couldn't leave the room unwalked either. We just had different lengths of corridor. The court was quiet a long time. The sheets moved on the line between us, and the ascendant of the Osran, in the worn place at the center of her brother's exile, said at last, quietly, in the voice the stones had carried to her in reverse for 21 years, 11 light years of corridor, and it took your basket to teach me the door was never locked from our side. Then she rose, and at the arch she paused, and the last thing she asked for, before all the treaty springs and the letters and the years of it began, was not in any record, because Corvey and her stylus were at the trestles. She asked, the song, the 4 lines and the turn, the stones flatten it. The warden's transcription is paper, once plainly from the source. My brother had a winter of it, give his sister one verse. So I stood among the wet linen in the last of the light 60 years old, in the heart of a stone court that had gone from prison to listening post to whatever it is now. The histories call it the first true room of the peace, and maybe that is what it is. And I hummed the Weaver's Walk for the Empress of Dragons, 4 lines and the turn and 4 lines again. She held still for it, the way her brother had the first time. The whole gold engine of her stopped around her listening, and when it was done, she went out through the arch without a word, because there are sounds that are private even when an empire later claims them as history, and she knew it, and so do I, and that is why the verse she actually heard, and what was in her face when she heard it, will stay between the 2 keepers it belongs to. The delegation stayed 9 days, as I have said, but it was that evening, between the supper trestles and the laundry line, that the piece stopped being paper for good, and not one signature was on duty at the time. Only a cook's beef, a boy's dark beer, a worn place stones, and an old roundabout weaving hummed badly in the gloaming by the only diplomat the evening required. The signing took an hour, the leaving took 9 days, and the leaving is the part I keep. There was never a question of whether he would go home. I want that recorded because a kind of story has grown up in the valley towns where the dragon chooses the laundress over the empire, and it is a pretty story, and it is false, and he would hate it. He was 21 years from his own sky. His name was in living mouths again, and the rolls of the Osran were waiting for the rest of him to follow it. When Envesa asked him, and she asked him, in the open court the first choice anyone had handed him since the signing, he answered before the question's echo died. Home. Of course, home. The court went quiet around me when he said it, every human eye sliding toward me sideways, and I stood there with my pins in my apron and felt nothing that the watchers expected and everything they could not see. You do not keep a creature all winter so that he will stay in the box. You keep him so that he can leave it. Any mother could have told the court that. Most of them had the grace to look away from whatever was on my face all the same. The 9 days were engineering. A siege dragon who cannot see and cannot fly does not board a carrier the way freight does, and the ascendancy would not hear of him traveling as freight. They built him a cradle frame on the great lawn, wing guards and human riggers, working side by side, which had never happened anywhere, and the riggers came back to the kitchens each night wide-eyed at how the Osran checked a load knot, and the wing guards, I am told, adopted within 2 days the riggers' habit of swearing at a jammed shackle in our language with great precision. Veshkara oversaw it all with her hawk's eye, and on the 4th day she appeared in my linen room, filling the door like a bronze gate, and stood in silence for a while in the way I had learned meant their kind of respect, and then said, he asks that the last days keep their shape, Thursday and Monday, the wash, the almanac, the colors. He says you will understand that the shape is the gift. I understood. We kept the shape. Thursday I hung the wash while he named the wind and read him the almanac, wrong about everything as ever, and he corrected it from his teeth, and we argued, and the new spring stock went into the dark behind his eyes. The green coming up the valley like water finding its level. The kestrel's first brood of the year on his east wall, 4 eggs, the exact brown of strong tea. Monday the same. He did not speak of the going, and neither did I. The shape was the gift, but that last Monday, at the end, as I gathered the pins, he turned the great blind head down to my level, close as the morning I had scrubbed his jaw, and he said, "I have been making a stock of my own, little keeper, against the years. The sound of your step when the knee was bad and you came anyway. The kettle from across the compound, 4 lines and a turn. I am told the high country is 11 light years from my hall. I have measured longer distances, no single winter, in this court, between the bench and this stone, and they were crossed. Distance is not what they taught us it was in the war. Nothing is what they taught us it was. That is the last forecast I will make you from this rock. You will not be rid of me, Edivane." "Weather permitting," I said, into the warm iron smell of him, with my hand on the pewter patch, and that was all either of us could afford, and it was enough. They lifted on a morning so clear it was a kindness of its own. The whole house stood out on the gravel. Hale, Pell, Corvey, David, the undercook, the riggers, the crows from the Capitol even, all of us small under the carrier wings, and the cradle rose with him in it, gold gardens on either flank, the Empress above like a second sun, and at the last, from the height where the high country becomes a map, there came down through the cold air a sound the valley towns argue about to this day. 4 notes and a turn and 4 notes again, in a voice like the ground-given wings. He had the tune all winter, every Thursday. The old fraud had been listening with both ears, and he carried the Weaver's Walk out of our sky and into the dark between the stars. And if you want to know what humanity got out of the Concord of Vasing, it is this. Somewhere 11 light years from my kitchen, an empire's worst weapon hums a laundry song from the valley towns, and the rolls of the Osran record where he learnt it. Things changed after, in the ways the histories tell. The renewal they signed is called the Vessing Standard now, and its first article, its first, where the hostage clause used to live, establishes in both languages the office of keeper, with attendance not forbidden but required, and they tell me clauses copied from it have gone into treaties between peoples I will never meet. A courthouse holds the original. The arch of the pledge court holds Hale's 3 words carved. The court itself holds the laundry lines by treaty. By actual treaty, severeth one demand, written into the annex by the Empress's own warden, while the riggers grinned. And the staff hang the wash there now in all seasons, and new hires are walked through on their first day and told the whole of it, standing on the swept path, which Pell will let no one relay, though the stones are worn odd. Some things a house keeps because it must. Some to things it keeps because they are the house. The letters come twice a year with the Ascendancy's courier, pressed sheets of something like mica, which sing when the attaché reads them out, his voice underneath theirs like a swept floor under dancing. Weather reports, mostly. The skies of a world I cannot picture, told to me in colors I taught him. A storm front off their southern sea, the color of a kettle before the polish. An aurora over the hall of the Osran like fruit and brandy. He built his stock, and he spends it on me. 11 light years against the postage, and I read them in the court, out loud, because I have my own superstitions now about which stones carry sound. And every treaty spring, when the delegation comes, it comes yearly now, they find reasons. The reasons are him. The carrier wings put down on the great lawn, and the cradle is carried to the arch, and the first talon of the Osran line, discharged with honor, guest of the house, takes up his old place in the court by the bench. In the sun he cannot see for a fortnight of Thursdays. The kestrels know him. The undercook, who is head cook now, sends out the beef bones like tribute. And the house goes about him gently and leaves the mornings to me, because the whole compound knows the shape of them by heart, the wash going up the line, sheet by sheet. The almanac read aloud, wrong about Thursday. An old woman and an old soldier arguing the frost like married people, while an empire's honor guard stands at the arch and pretends not to listen. He still cannot see the sky. The war took that, and nothing gives it back. We do not pretend otherwise, he and I. We never pretended anything. That was the whole of what we were. But every morning he is here, the great blind head comes around at my step, before my basket touches the bench, and he asks me what color it is. And I tell him the truth the way I would want it told to me, even when it is gray, especially when it is gray. The gray with the light behind it. He taught me to see that one himself.